The fluorescent lights inside Hargrove's grocery had that particular quality that only existed in supermarkets after 10 o'clock, a flat, institutional brightness that made everything look slightly more exhausted than it actually was. The produce section stood abandoned, the misting system clicking off for the night. 3 checkout lanes open out of 12. The overhead speakers played a soft country song nobody was listening to. Owen Calloway came through the sliding doors at 10:47 p.m. He was 34, though he looked older in the way that men do when they've been running on interrupted sleep for 8 consecutive months. His jacket was a North Face from 3 winters ago, the cuffs starting to fray. He carried his daughter against his chest in a cotton wrap carrier, her head tucked under his chin, and he moved with the particular careful gait of a man trying not to wake a sleeping child. Small steps, shoulders still, breathing measured. Emma was 8 months old. She had her mother's nose and her father's stubbornness, and right now she was doing that fragile, almost sleeping thing, where her lips made tiny unconscious movements and her fingers curled around the fabric of his shirt. Owen went straight to the infant formula aisle. He didn't browse. He reached up for the second shelf Enfamil Gentlies, the one Emma's stomach could handle, and placed it in the basket he held in his free hand. Then he stood there for a moment, calculating something in his head, and the calculation didn't work out the way he needed it to. He put it back, stood there again, picked it up again, and walked to the service counter near the front. The woman behind the service counter was named Beverly, according to her name tag. And Beverly had 30 minutes left in her shift and very little patience remaining in her reserves. She looked up from her phone when Owen approached, and her expression shifted into the particular arrangement of a person about to deal with an inconvenience. "I need to return this," Owen said. "I bought it earlier today." "I have the receipt." He placed the formula on the counter. The receipt was folded in his jacket pocket, a little soft from handling. Beverly looked at the box. Was something wrong with it? No. He kept his voice even. I need to return it." Beverly's expression didn't change, but something in it hardened. She took the box, turned it over, inspected it with the thoroughness of someone trying to find a reason to say no. "You bought this today?" "About 4 hours ago." She set it down and began typing slowly into her terminal. "Store policy is 15 days for unopened formula. But we do note returns." She said, "Note returns" in a way that was meant to make him feel something, and it landed the way she intended it to. Owen said nothing. He looked at his daughter. Emma made a small sound, not quite a cry, more like a question. Her face scrunched. She was waking up, and when she woke up she would be hungry, and there was nothing at home to feed her. The calculation in the formula aisle had been accurate. He had $43 until Friday. The formula cost $28. The gas bill was due Thursday. He did not explain any of this to Beverly. The woman in line behind Owen had been there since before he reached the counter. She was standing with one item, a bottle of sparkling water, and she was holding her phone to her ear with her shoulder, while her other hand held a folded document. She was 36, dark hair pulled back, wearing a charcoal blazer that had not come off a rack. Her name was Margot Sinclair, and she was the chief financial officer of Callaway Vance Capital Group, which managed approximately $3.2 billion in assets and employed 412 people in 6 cities. She was on a call with her deputy controller, and the call had been going for 11 minutes. And it involved the words reconciliation error, wire transfer, and Singapore office in a sequence that she found both unsurprising and deeply annoying. She was not, at the moment, paying attention to the man at the counter in front of her. Then Emma made that sound again, not a cry. Just that small, particular sound that babies make when hunger is becoming urgent, a sound that cuts through adult noise the way almost nothing else does. Margot's eyes moved without her deciding to move them. She saw the fraying cuffs, the careful stillness of his shoulders, the way his jaw tightened when Beverly's voice carried the judgment in it. The formula box on the counter, the receipt, folded soft. She saw the baby's face crumple slightly against her father's chest. "Hold on," she said into the phone. "I need 60 seconds." She lowered the phone. Owen was signing something on Beverly's terminal, not looking up. Beverly was saying something about store credit. And Owen was nodding with the expression of a man who has decided to stop listening to things that don't help him. Margot stepped up beside him. She placed her sparkling water on the counter. "Put the formula on my tab," she said to Beverly. Beverly looked at her. Owen looked at her. "I'm sorry?" Beverly said. "The formula. Add it to my purchase." Margot set her card on the counter without flourish. "And ring the water separately." "Ma'am, the gentleman is in the middle of a return." "Then cancel the return." She looked at Beverly with a precision that did not involve raising her voice. "Process a new transaction. Formula plus water." "My card." Owen said. "No," he said it quietly, with the kind of control that comes from having to hold yourself together in front of a sleeping child. He turned to look at her fully. And something in his expression was not gratitude and not embarrassment. It was something older than both of those, something that had to do with a line he'd drawn somewhere and intended to keep. "I appreciate it," he said. "But no." Margot looked at him, not with pity, with something more like assessment. "You have a hungry child. I'm aware. This isn't about what you need. It's about what she needs. Those aren't the same transaction." He was quiet for a moment. Emma shifted against his chest, and he adjusted his arm automatically, the motion of someone who has done it thousands of times. "I don't know you," he said. "You don't need to." She picked up her card and held it toward Beverly. "This is not about obligation. It's not about charity. I have the money. The child is hungry. The math is straightforward." Owen looked at her for a long moment. Then he looked at his daughter. Then he looked back at Margot. And whatever he saw in her face, the absence of pity in it, maybe, the blunt practicality, the complete lack of sentiment, something shifted. "1 box," he said. "1 box," she agreed. Beverly processed it without further commentary. Outside, the rain had started, the thin, indifferent kind that doesn't justify an umbrella, but still gets you wet. Owen stopped under the canopy and adjusted the carrier, tucking the formula into his jacket pocket where it would stay dry. Margot walked past him toward the parking lot, her phone already back at her ear. She was halfway to her car when he called out. "Hey." She turned. "Why?" he said. She considered this for a moment. The rain made a soft sound on the canopy above him. "I have a meeting tomorrow," she said, "where I'm going to fight with 3 grown men about whether we move $40 million to a different fund structure. That conversation will take 2 hours." She looked at him. This took $40.30. It wasn't a hard choice. She turned back toward the parking lot. He watched her go. He hadn't caught her name. She hadn't offered it. Under his chin, Emma had fallen back to sleep. He stood there for another moment in the cold, and something moved through him that wasn't quite gratitude and wasn't quite anything he had a word for. Then he walked to his car, buckled his daughter into her seat with the care he gave everything that mattered, and drove home. The apartment on Fenwick Street was 620 square feet, and Owen had learned to know it the way you learn a body: every creak, every draft, every corner of light at different hours. The kitchen was small, but organized with the precision of someone who'd had to be. The formula tin had its own shelf. The sterilized bottles stood in a row by the drying rack. Emma's swing sat in the corner of the living room, and next to it a pile of soft toys and a fleece blanket printed with small foxes. His laptop was on the table, along with a spiral notebook covered in handwriting that was dense and technical, and his. He fed Emma at midnight. She took the bottle with the focused earnestness of someone who has been waiting, her eyes fixed on his face the whole time, and he talked to her quietly while she drank nonsense, mostly the names of things in the room, a half-remembered description of a hiking trail he'd done years ago in Colorado. When she was done, he held her upright against his shoulder and patted her back in the rhythm she liked, and she made the small, satisfied sound, and then went still, her breath evening out. He put her down in the crib and stood over her for a moment. Her fingers were curled, her chest moved. She was alive and warm and full. He went back to the kitchen table and opened his laptop. The spiral notebook had been filling for 2 months. He'd taken 3 IT consulting contracts since leaving Meridian Systems' small businesses, one dental practice with a server that hadn't been updated since 2019, a bakery that needed its point-of-sale network rebuilt. None of it was what he'd done at Meridian. At Meridian, he'd been a senior infrastructure architect, which meant he understood the bones of systems the way other people understood their own hands. He'd built things that hundreds of thousands of people used without knowing they were using them. He'd left 2 weeks after Claire died. It hadn't been a decision so much as a recognition. He'd gone into the office on a Monday morning, sat down, looked at his screen, and understood with complete clarity that he could not do this here and also do what Emma needed. One of those things would suffer. He knew which one he was going to choose. His manager had offered leave. He'd taken it. 2 weeks later, he'd submitted his resignation. His manager had been decent about it, had said the door was open, had meant it, and Owen had thanked him, and gone home, and learned to fold onesies efficiently, and make formula at 3 in the morning without turning on the overhead light. He was not unhappy. That was the thing people didn't understand when they looked at him, with the particular sad sympathy reserved for widowers. He was not unhappy. He was tired, and he was financially stretched, and there were moments when Emma looked up at him with an expression so identical to her mother's that he had to take a breath before he could speak. But he was not unhappy. He had Emma. Emma was everything. 11 miles away, in a corner office on the 14th floor of a building that had views of the river on clear days, Margot Sinclair was still awake. The Singapore reconciliation error had turned out to be a data entry problem, which was the most expensive kind, not because the number was wrong, but because you had to spend 4 hours confirming that it was only the number and not the process. She'd verified it herself, because that was the kind of CFO she was. She trusted her team, and she verified. Her desk was clear except for the current document and a glass of water. The office had no personal photographs. There was a single small succulent on the windowsill that her assistant had placed there, because she'd decided Margot needed something living in the room. Margot had looked at it for several days before deciding she didn't object. She was thinking, slightly, about the man at the supermarket. Not about the transaction was unremarkable. She'd covered bills for strangers before. She had the means, and she found the logic of it unassailable. What she was thinking about was his face when she'd said, "This is not about charity." He'd heard that. It had mattered to him which thing it was. That was interesting. She made a note on her legal pad not about him, about the Singapore situation, and went back to the document. The office of Meridian Solutions was 12 blocks from Hargrove's grocery, in a converted industrial space that still had the original steel beams. They sold enterprise software to mid-sized companies and had been doing so profitably for 9 years. The current IT crisis involved their payment gateway, which had begun producing intermittent errors 3 days ago in a pattern that their internal team had characterized as a bug and had not yet fixed. Owen found out about it because Ted Hauser called him. Ted had been at Meridian Systems with Owen, a network engineer, competent and methodical, with a reputation for asking Owen for help when something didn't make sense and for being grateful afterward. He called at 8:15 a.m. on a Thursday. "I know you're not doing the full-time thing," Ted said. "But this is weird, Owen. I've looked at it for 3 days, and it doesn't feel like a bug." "What does it feel like?" "It feels like something that knows what it's doing." Owen was quiet for a moment. Emma was in her bouncer, chewing on a rubber giraffe with serious concentration. "Send me the logs," he said. He worked on it for 2 hours that morning. Emma asleep in her crib, laptop open on the kitchen table, the spiral notebook filling with observations. Ted was right. It didn't feel like a bug. Bugs were inconsistent, irrational, products of human error or environmental interaction. What Owen was looking at was inconsistent in a very specific way, errors that clustered around particular transaction types, at particular times, affecting particular account ranges. The pattern was too coherent to be accidental. He wrote, "Not malfunction, selection." He called Ted back. "This isn't a bug," he said. "You have an input handling exploit that someone is using deliberately. Someone with system access is triggering false errors on specific transactions and redirecting the flagged funds to a holding state." "How long has your CFO been with the company?" Ted was quiet for a moment. I can't just go accuse. I'm not asking you to. I'm telling you what the data says. Who to point it at is your call. He went back to the logs. It was, he would later recognize, the kind of morning that changes things without announcing it. He didn't think about the supermarket while he was working. He thought about the architecture of the problem. The elegance of whoever had set it up there was a sophistication to it that he found professionally interesting, even as he found it ethically repellent. He thought about the specific choice of transaction types targeted. He thought about the access level required to mask the redirect. Emma woke up at 11, and he fed her lunch and told her about the problem in the same quiet, narrating voice he used for everything, partly because the sound seemed to comfort her, partly because explaining things aloud helped him think. Somebody with the keys to the house, he told her, decided to use them to move furniture around when no one was looking. The question is, where did they move it to? Emma considered this with the giraffe in her mouth. That's a good question, he told her. Margot's car died on a Thursday. This was less catastrophic than it sounds. She didn't drive often, and when she did, it was usually the town car service she used for airport runs. But the car had been her mother's, and she'd kept it for reasons that had nothing to do with practicality. And when the mechanic at the dealership told her it needed a new electrical control module, she had the particular feeling of something she wasn't ready to let go of, being taken from her incrementally. The dealership's loaner was in use. She called a car service and waited. The waiting room had a small television, 3 chairs, and a table with outdated magazines. There was also a man in the corner with a laptop and a baby in a carrier on the floor beside him. And it took Margot a moment to understand why she recognized him. Owen looked up from his laptop and recognized her at the same moment. Neither of them said anything for a second. The formula worked out, he said finally. I assumed it would, she said. She sat down 2 chairs away. What are you doing here? Waiting. My car is. He stopped. Actually, I'm working. The waiting is incidental. He looked back at his screen. You? The same. She had her own laptop out within 30 seconds. She did not find it strange to work in a mechanic's waiting room. She found it strange not to work. They worked in parallel silence for 20 minutes. Emma lay on a blanket on the floor, examining her hands with focused interest. Then Margot said, without looking up, What are you working on? Payment system exploit. He was typing. Someone's using input handling vulnerabilities to redirect flagged transactions to a holding state. Elegant, actually. Wrong, but elegant. Margot looked up. What kind of system? Enterprise gateway, mid-sized company. He glanced at her. Why? She was quiet for a moment. We had a reconciliation anomaly in our Singapore office 2 weeks ago. Resolved it as a data entry error. She said the last part in the tone of a person who is revising their conclusion in real time. What access level would someone need to run this kind of exploit? Finance admin with back-end API access. He met her eyes. Who has that at your company? Several people. She was already on her phone, pulling up something. What's your name? Owen Calloway. Margot Sinclair. She looked at him. You were an infrastructure architect. It wasn't a question. He looked at her steadily. How do you know that? I looked you up after the supermarket. She said it without embarrassment, as a simple fact. Meridian Systems. Senior infrastructure architect until 18 months ago. Before that, Apex Financial Technologies. You have a degree from Carnegie Mellon and 3 published papers on distributed system security. Emma made a sound from the floor. Owen looked down at her automatically, then back at Margot. You looked me up, he said. I like to know who I've been in proximity to, she said. It's a professional habit. She paused. It became personal interest. He looked at her for a long moment. There was something in his expression that was close to amusement, but careful about it. Most people just Google someone out of curiosity, he said. You read their papers. I found them interesting. She set her phone down. The one on cascade failure prediction in financial systems. I recommended it to my infrastructure team. He blinked. This was, she gathered, not what he'd expected. Emma, on the floor, had rolled onto her back and was staring at the ceiling with complete satisfaction. "She's doing well," Margot said. "She's doing great," Owen said, and for the first time since the supermarket, something unclenched in his face. 3 weeks later, Margot's company had a problem. It wasn't the Singapore anomaly that was resolved, and in resolving it, Margot had quietly reassigned 3 people's system access and notified the board's audit committee in a memo that was 12 words and contained all the relevant facts. The problem was the payment gateway for their largest client portfolio, a processing system that handled approximately $40 million in daily transactions and had, at 6:47 a.m. on a Tuesday, begun producing errors that her internal IT team had been unable to diagnose in 6 hours. Every hour of downtime cost the company an estimated $200,000 in operational disruption and client penalty exposure. Her IT director was a capable man named Richard Pratt, who had 15 years of experience, and was, at this moment, standing in front of a whiteboard with 3 of his engineers, and the whiteboard was covered in hypotheses, and none of them had led anywhere useful. Margot looked at the whiteboard for 40 seconds. "Get me Owen Calloway's number," she said to her assistant. She drove to Fenwick Street herself. She did not call ahead because she had found, in her professional life, that calling ahead gave people time to rehearse their refusal. Owen answered the door in a gray Henley, Emma on his hip. He looked at her, then at the car she'd arrived in, then back at her. "You know where I live," he said. "You're in the phone book. Nobody's in the phone book. You're a licensed IT contractor. Your address is on your business registration." She looked at him steadily. "I have a problem. I need 4 hours of your time, and I will pay you $3,000. Emma looked at Margot with the concentrated appraisal of an infant who has not yet learned to be polite about staring. Owen leaned against the doorframe. "What kind of problem?" "Payment system. It started producing errors this morning. My team has been on it for 6 hours and hasn't isolated the cause. I need someone who thinks differently. You have an IT department. I have a very good IT department," she said. "And they are not finding it." She paused. "You found the Meridian exploit in 2 hours. I had the logs in front of me. I'll give you the logs." She met his eyes. "I've read your papers, Owen. I know what you're capable of. I'm not asking you to save my company. I'm asking you to look at a problem that needs your specific set of eyes." He was quiet. Emma had grabbed a fistful of his Henley and was working it methodically. "I'd need to work from here," he said finally. "I'm not leaving her, Fina, and if I find something your team missed, I'm not being diplomatic about it. I'd be very alarmed if you were." He called her at 2 in the morning. He'd been working for 6 hours. Emma had gone down at 7:30, and he'd worked through the evening with the kind of focused intensity that he'd missed without knowing he'd missed it, the problem pulling at him, the architecture of it gradually becoming clear, his handwriting filling the notebook with a density that meant he was somewhere useful. "It's not a system error," he said when she answered. There was a pause. "Tell me, someone is running a suppression exploit on your transaction validation layer. They're not stealing money, not yet. They're masking transactions, creating invisible holds, building a reservoir." He looked at his notes. "They've been doing it for at least 60 days. The errors this morning are because they pushed too far and the system started flagging inconsistencies." The silence on the other end was the particular kind that happens when someone very controlled is processing something very bad. "Who has the access level to do this?" she said. "Finance admin with back-end gateway credentials. Full audit trail, but the audit trail is also being cleaned." He paused. "Someone who knows your system architecture and has legitimate reason to be in it." "That's a short list," Margot said. "I know." He looked at his screen. "I can send you the documentation. It's thorough. Timestamps, transaction IDs, the cleaning protocol they used on the audit trail. It's all there." Another silence. "Owen." Her voice was careful. "How confident are you?" "I've been wrong before," he said. "This isn't one of those times." The next 48 hours moved in a kind of controlled urgency. Margot did not call the police immediately. She called her general counsel first, then the head of her audit committee, Then the chairman of the board. She presented Owen's documentation, which she'd reviewed in its entirety and found, as she'd expected, meticulous, and she spoke for 22 minutes without notes, laying out the evidence in the sequence she found most logically compelling. No one in the room was happy. That was the nature of this kind of discovery. The question of who became, rapidly, very clear. Grant Hollis was 47, the company's deputy CFO, and he had been with Callaway Vance Capital Group for 11 years. He was smooth, technically accomplished, and had a habit of completing other people's sentences that Margot had always found slightly aggressive. He had finance admin credentials and full gateway access and a very solid alibi that dissolved under the weight of specific transaction timestamps. He had also, it emerged, been managing a separate LLC that the reservoir was feeding. Owen was not in the boardroom when this was presented. He had sent the documentation and had not been asked to attend. He was, in fact, at a pediatrician's appointment with Emma, where the doctor confirmed she was developing beautifully and suggested they might start introducing soft foods. He found out about the outcome when Margot called him at 6 that evening. "You were right," she said. "How bad?" "Bad. 11 years. We're still calculating the total exposure." She paused. "It would have been significantly worse. The reservoir had another 3 weeks before he was going to move it." Owen was in the parking garage of the medical center, Emma in her car seat, a paper printout of developmental milestones on the dashboard. "I'm glad it's useful," he said. "You solved it," she said. "I looked at it long enough." He glanced at the printout. "The problem solved itself. Once you gave it enough attention. I've been thinking about that as a philosophy. Don't. It only works on systems that want to be understood." There was something that might have been a smile in her voice. "Are you available next week?" "For what?" "I want to retain you." "Consulting contract. Your rate, your terms, your hours." She paused. "Emma is welcome in whatever workspace you're using." He was quiet for a long moment. Outside the parking garage, the city made its ordinary sounds. "I need to think about it," he said. "Take the time you need," she said. "I'll be here." The board meeting was on a Wednesday. Grant Hollis arrived thinking it was a quarterly review. He was dressed for a quarterly review, Italian suit, the gold cufflinks he wore when he wanted to project ease. He had a folder of prepared materials. He found instead the full board, Margot, 2 external auditors, the general counsel, and a federal examiner from the SEC, who had been very quietly briefed 3 days prior. Owen's documentation was on every screen in the room. Grant looked at the screens for a long moment. Then he looked at Margot, and something in his face shifted from confident to calculating to something that was neither. There are errors in this analysis," he said. "There are not," Margot said. She said it the way she said most things, quietly, with the complete absence of doubt. "The timestamps are from your credentials. The cleaning protocol matches the access pattern of your terminal. The LLC receiving the funds was incorporated 4 years ago under your wife's maiden name, which was thorough, but not thorough enough." She let that sit. "You had 11 years here," she said. "You were competent. You were trusted." She looked at him across the table. "I'd like to understand why." Grant said nothing. "You don't have to tell me," she said. "That's what the federal process is for." She looked at the general counsel. "You can proceed." The aftermath was bureaucratic and exhausting and necessary. What Margot took from it, not immediately, but in the weeks that followed, was a specific discomfort with her own assumptions. She was very good at what she did. She was precise, rigorous, thorough. She had built the financial architecture of Callaway Vance from a solid foundation to something genuinely exceptional, and she had missed this. Not because she was incompetent, because Grant had been trusted, and trust, in the absence of the right kind of skepticism, was a vulnerability. She had all the right processes, and none of them had caught it. Owen had caught it in 6 hours with read-only access to the logs. She sat with that. Owen signed a 6-month consulting contract. His rate was lower than what Margot had offered. When she pointed this out, he said, "I'm working 20 hours a week. This is what 20 hours a week costs. She reviewed the contract to reflect the rate he'd cited, and did not argue, because she had the sense he was being precise rather than modest, and that arguing would miss the point. He worked from his kitchen table. He sent Emma to a part-time childcare program 3 mornings a week, something he'd been avoiding because of the cost. And that was now manageable. He worked the other hours around Emma's schedule during naps, in the evenings when she went down, occasionally with Emma in her bouncer beside him, which she seemed to find acceptable. His work was thorough and specific and unusual. What Margot found, over the first month, was that he didn't think the way her internal team thought. They were good at finding problems they'd been trained to find. Owen found the problems that weren't on anyone's list yet, the architectural vulnerabilities, the places where the design assumptions had aged past their validity, the spaces where trust had been substituted for process. He also asked questions that other people didn't ask. Not aggressively quietly, in his emails, in the margins of the documents he returned to her. Why is this field mutable after submission? Who reviewed this integration when the API changed? This logging gap is 3 weeks wide. What happened then? The questions made her infrastructure team uncomfortable. She told them to answer the questions. They had lunch once. It happened because Emma's childcare called at 11:30 to say she'd developed a slight fever. Not serious, the childcare director said, but come get her, and Owen messaged Margot to say he'd need to reschedule their 2 o'clock. Margot messaged back, "I'll come to you." She arrived at 12:15 with sandwiches from the deli 2 blocks away, and Owen opened the door with Emma on his hip, who was warm but not miserable, who looked at Margot with the same serious concentration she'd deployed at the mechanic's waiting room. They ate at the kitchen table. Emma sat in her high chair and ate mashed banana with the focused commitment of a professional. The conversation was not about work. It moved, in the way that table conversations do, through the random terrain of 2 people who don't yet know where their edges are: his time at Carnegie Mellon, the hiking trail in Colorado, her parents' house in Vermont, the paper she'd read in graduate school about systemic risk that had changed how she thought about everything after. "Why finance?" he asked at one point. She considered this. "My father lost his business when I was 12. Bad contract, worse timing. We were fine, we recovered. But I watched it happen. I watched what it does to a family when the numbers are wrong." She looked at her coffee. "I decided I wanted to be the person who makes sure the numbers are right." He nodded. "Why architecture?" she asked. "I like the bones of things," he said. "The way something works underneath. When I understand the architecture, everything else makes sense." He looked at Emma, who had banana on her forehead and didn't seem troubled by it. "People work the same way, I think. Once you understand the architecture, what's the architecture of a person? What they do when something goes wrong," he said. "Not what they say they'll do. What they actually do." Emma held up a piece of banana in offer. Margot looked at it, then at Emma's face, which was completely earnest. "Thank you," she said, and took it. Emma seemed satisfied with this transaction. The policy changes happened gradually, which was, Margot had come to believe, how real changes happened. Not in announcements. In the slow revision of default assumptions, she rewrote the company's remote work policy first. Then the parental support provisions, not just maternity leave, which had been adequate, but provisions for single parents, for caregivers, for people whose life arrangements didn't fit the standard model. She'd been thinking about this for longer than she'd known Owen. But something about working alongside him, watching the way he'd built a life around what mattered, the way his competence and his presence for Emma existed in the same space, had clarified what she'd been circling. She didn't announce these changes as being about him. They weren't about him specifically. They were about the architecture of the company, which she'd identified as having a gap, and she was filling the gap. Richard Pratt, her IT director, came to her office 2 weeks after Owen's documentation had locked Grant Hollis out of the system. "He's the best I've worked with," Richard said. Which was a significant thing for Richard to say. "And I've worked with people from Google and 2 of the national labs." "I know," Margot said. "Is there a path to a permanent role?" "That's his decision," Richard nodded. "If you have any pull with him, "I have whatever pull I have," she said, which was not a dodge. It was exactly what she meant. She went to Fenwick Street on a Saturday evening in October, 5 months after the supermarket. She brought nothing. She stood at the door and knocked, and Owen opened it and looked at her with the expression of someone recalibrating expectations. "No sandwiches?" he said. "I'm not here professionally." He looked at her for a moment, then stepped back to let her in. Emma was on the living room floor, pulling herself to standing by gripping the edge of the couch, a developmental achievement she had apparently discovered recently and was now testing compulsively. She grabbed the couch, stood, looked around at the world from this new height with enormous satisfaction, let go, fell on her bottom, did not cry, grabbed the couch again. They watched her do this 3 times. "She's been doing that for 4 days, Owen said. "She's very committed to it. She's committed to everything." He sat down on the floor, where Emma could see him. "Gets it from her mother." He said it simply, without performance. Just a fact about where Emma had come from. Margot sat on the couch. Emma looked up at her. Then, with the sovereign decision-making of a 10-month-old who has done her assessment, she grabbed the knee of Margot's slacks for support, pulled herself to standing, and looked Margot directly in the face from a distance of about 8 inches. Margot looked back at her. "Hello," she said. Emma made a sound that was not quite a word, but it was definitely a response. "She likes you," Owen said, from the floor. "I think she's just looking for a stable surface. She's particular about surfaces." He looked up at Margot. "What are you here for?" Margot looked at Emma, who was still standing, still holding on, looking around at the room with satisfaction. She thought about the question she could answer, and the question he was actually asking. "I'm not sure," she said. It was, for her, an unusual thing to say. She did not generally advance on uncertain ground, but she'd been thinking, for 5 months, about his answer to her question. What they do when something goes wrong, not what they say they'll do, what they actually do. She knew what she'd done in the supermarket. She knew what he'd done every morning since his wife died. She was beginning to understand what she wanted to do now. "I'm not here to offer you something," she said, "or fix something, or solve something." She looked at him. "I'm here because—" She stopped. Started again. "I find that I want to be in proximity to you, and I've been ignoring that for long enough that it's become inefficient." Owen looked at her for a long moment. Something moved in his face. He was quiet, the way he was quiet when he was working a problem, and she let him be quiet. Emma let go of Margot's slacks and sat down. Then looked up at her, as if to confirm she was still there. "You could have just said that at the mechanic's waiting room," Owen said finally. "I didn't know it yet at the mechanic's waiting room." "When did you know?" "When you told me what the architecture of a person was," she said. "I've been testing the theory since." He was quiet for another moment. Then, slowly, he smiled. Not the careful version she'd seen before, but a full one, the kind that involved his eyes, and she found it considerably more disorienting than she'd anticipated. "And," he said, "the theory holds," she said. Emma, having confirmed that Margot was staying, turned her attention back to the couch. November came in with cold, clear days and the smell of wood smoke, and the park 2 blocks from Fenwick Street filled with fallen leaves that the maintenance crew raked into piles and children immediately destroyed. Owen brought Emma on Saturday mornings. She was 11 months now, not quite walking on her own but making serious attempts. And she navigated the world with a kind of determined curiosity that he found, every day, an education. She wanted to touch everything. She wanted to understand the origin of sounds. She held leaves up to the light and turned them slowly, as if reading them. Margot came the 3rd Saturday. She arrived at 9:30 in jeans and a coat he'd never seen on her, which was unremarkable except that it meant she'd dressed for a park and not for an office, and he found this small distinction interesting. Emma saw her from across the path and made a sound and reached in her direction with the emphatic arm gesture that she used for things she approved of. They walked the path that circled the small pond in the center of the park. Emma in the carrier against Owen's chest, Margot with her hands in her coat pockets, their shoulders occasionally close. They talked about nothing in particular. She'd been to Vermont for her parents' anniversary. Her father had danced in the kitchen, she said, which had been both embarrassing and the best thing she'd seen in years. He'd been rebuilding a client's network infrastructure, which was not interesting to describe, but had been interesting to do. Emma had eaten a cracker and looked at him like he'd handed her a revelation. "She's going to be interested in how things work," Margot said. "She already is." He looked down at Emma, who was watching the pond. "She stares at the washing machine when it's running. Just sits there and watches. Smart, or extremely patient. Both can be true." They came around the far side of the pond, where the path turned back toward the gate. Emma had been quiet for several minutes, watching everything, the leaves and the water, and the people passing. Then she shifted in the carrier, reached sideways, and grabbed Margot's hand. Just grabbed it, held on. Margot looked down at her, then at Owen. He was looking ahead. But something in his face was very still. In the way things go still when they've arrived somewhere. "She does that," he said, after a moment. "I know," Margot said. She did not let go. They walked the rest of the way to the gate like that, Emma holding on. The three of them moving together through the cold, bright morning, past the leaves and the water, and the ordinary Saturday world. By February, Owen had opened a small IT services firm, not a large operation himself, a part-time associate named Patrick who was 27 and thorough, and a client list of 8 businesses who valued the quality of Owen's work over the speed of his expansion. He had no interest in scaling past the point where he could give each client his actual attention. He had very clear thoughts about what he wanted his life to look like, and an enormous IT conglomerate was not among them. He still consulted for Callaway Vance on a reduced basis. When he was there, occasionally in person now, Emma in the company's dedicated family space that had appeared in the second-floor layout renovation, the infrastructure team had a habit of coming to him with problems. They described as just something I wanted another set of eyes on, which was how he knew they trusted him. Richard Pratt had stopped being competitive about it about 2 months in, which Owen respected. Margot's title did not change. Her perspective on what she was doing did. She'd been very good at the technical architecture of capital, the flow and management, and risk assessment of money. She remained very good at it. What changed was her understanding of what the money was for, which was not a new idea but which she found herself applying with a specificity she hadn't before. She visited the Vermont house in February and helped her parents rearrange the kitchen because her mother's back had been bothering her, and the layout was impractical. Her father made them all chilly and told stories about the business years, some of them things she hadn't heard before, and she sat in the kitchen and listened and thought about the architecture of families, how it was built from the same elements as everything else, the trust and the load-bearing structures and the places where design assumptions had to be revised, but how the metric for success was completely different. She thought about this on the drive back. She thought about Emma grabbing her hand at the pond. The last Saturday in March, Owen's kitchen table had 2 laptops on it. He was working on a network assessment for a law firm downtown. She was reviewing a risk analysis that her team had flagged, which she found not quite convincing, and which she was annotating in the margins in the precise way she annotated everything. Emma was in the living room, attempting to stack wooden blocks. She was managing 3 before the tower fell, and the falling seemed to give her as much satisfaction as the stacking. At some point in the afternoon, without either of them noting the transition, they'd both stopped working and were watching Emma from the kitchen doorway. "She's going to try 4, Owen said. "She'll get it. She will. Probably not today." Emma placed the 4th block. The tower wobbled, held. She looked at it with enormous eyes. Then she looked at them. The expression on her face was the particular one that children have when they've done something that surprised even themselves, the beginning of wonder at what they turn out to be capable of. "She got it," Margot said. "She got it," Owen said. Emma knocked the tower down. Then she started building again. There are things that change a life loudly. The announcements, the contracts, the doors that open with the sound of something definitive. And then there are the other kind. The ones that happen in supermarket lines and mechanics' waiting rooms and Saturday mornings by a pond. The ones that don't announce themselves because they're too busy being real. The formula had cost $28. What it had bought, what that one small, unsentimentalized act of attention had set in motion, was not countable in the way Margot usually counted things. She'd tried, once, because counting was her nature. She'd given up and written in her notebook instead. Sometimes the architecture of a life changes because someone looked up at exactly the right moment. She'd crossed it out. Too much. Too neat. What she wrote instead was nothing. She closed the notebook. She went back to the kitchen table, where Owen was working, where Emma was building, where the afternoon light came through the window at the particular angle it did on late March days in the city. She sat down. She opened her laptop. She stayed,